When we're trying to drive power out of a client and build in a top position that locks in the body so that way we can get that weight to move up or to drive force, snap the quads is what we really want to use. And the main reason is when you snap the quads, you're locking your pelvis into place and you're still bracing through your abs. So your quads will naturally brace nice and tight. Your glutes will then do what they're meant to do, and so will your abs. So anytime you're doing a hinge-based movement, think of it in terms of the opposite. Your quads will snap to drive you in, and then that way we're going with the entire front side to make sure we don't live and go into hyperextension. So let's look at a sumo deadlift, for example. If we just come straight on up, a lot of times we will not finish that move in its entirety, or if we're just focusing on snapping the hips, we will go into a hyperextension position because we're focused on driving the hips through. But if at the top she's struggling and she's driving and I'm like, Krill, snap the quads, snap the quads, snap the quads. There we go. Notice she finished really strong and tall, but without going into hyperextension. If I was gonna give a physical cue with this, I'm gonna come from the side, snap the quads, boom. Notice I created a wedge and I did it with my hands so that I'm not touching from an open palm standpoint. I gave right on the side of her obliques to the front where I'm actually hitting a little bit of abdominal. So I'm teaching her to brace because now she doesn't want to get punched in the stomach, but I'm also then hitting the hamstrings, which are what are really driving this movement on up. So I'm creating a wedge where I want her own body to create the wedge, but it's by saying snap the quads that all of this happens, right? Works really well with the kettlebell swing also, right? So often you'll probably see your clients, they'll hyperextend through the lumbar spine and go into that position, right? Or they go really short and they don't quite finish it. So if I just say snap the quads, snap, yep, snap, right? So I'm creating the wedge at the exact same timing and I'm creating that ability by bracing the quads. So naturally it wants to actually turn on and I'm stopping the position so that her back doesn't go too far back. So I have an open hand position here to make sure that she doesn't end up in hyperextension. Now, inversely, it works really well to say snap the hips or pop the hips, pop, snap, your word, your choice. But ultimately, when we are doing a opposite move that is quad dominant now as opposed to hamstring hinge dominant. So if we're doing a squat, right? And so she's going into a nice goblet squat position. Oftentimes people won't finish tall. They won't be able to lock through. And I'm like, snap the hips, boom, good. Pop the hips all the way through. There we go. Pop the hips, 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 boom. So then I'm just repeating what I want. I want those hips to drive all the way through and get that position and elicit that change. Now, same thing, I'm gonna block from the quads and from her back with my open palm hitting from the sides where my thumbs basically meet, basically that inside position. And that's gonna drive her into this tall position so she doesn't end up hyperextended, but so she also doesn't end up not coming all the way. Because then I can be like, snap the hips, no, make sure your back touches my hand, make sure your back touches my hand. And now I'm doing it one step further with this. Also works extremely well to be able to do it from glute bridges or hip thrusts where you need the hips to drive all the way through, right? So if anybody's really struggling with power and they're going with a glute bridge or a hip thrust, I'm gonna see that they're not extending all the way, very common. I'll be like, girl, snap the hips, come on, pop the hips all the way up, pop, 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 good, and pop, good. So I'm not going to physically apply any pressure in this position, just knowing the nature of the movement, we wanna make sure the client feels safe. So I'm gonna really try and drive and I'm visually there and I'm creating energy with my cueing to make sure that I'm getting the change out of them. And then afterwards we can talk about how it works best.